Howdy my totally as always Tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video, and today we're going to be talking about some Dragon Quest. Yes, Dragon Quest, one of the longest running JRPG franchises of all time, a series where some of the entries are some of the most lauded, respected, and just beloved role-playing games of all time. Dragon Quest really doesn't need an introduction. And today we are finally doing a Dragon Quest ranking. I'm not ranking all of the main games as I have not played all of the main games yet. I've played a majority of them and I've quite liked what I've played, but I haven't played all the main games yet, so that's coming one day in the future. But today we're looking at the modern Dragon Quest games. Now I know what you might be thinking. You might be going, modern? What do you mean modern Dragon Quest games? What are those? Aren't like all the Dragon Quest games the same? Well, let me answer that. What I consider the modern Dragon Quest games are games you can play on your modern consoles, whether that's Switch, PS4, 5, Xbox One, Series X, or PC. Really 2013 and on for the home consoles. There were some games released for the 3DS, but I wouldn't exactly call the 3DS a modern system. So I'm sure the follow-up question you have now is, what are the modern Dragon Quest games? Well, what I consider the modern Dragon Quest games and what we're looking at today are Dragon Quest Heroes 1 and 2, Dragon Quest 11, Dragon Quest Builders 1 and 2, Dragon Quest Treasures, Infinity Strash, Dragon Quest The Adventure of Dai, and the recently released Dragon Quest Monsters The Dark Prince. And so we're going to be looking at these games, ranking them worst to best, giving each one of them a little review, seeing how they all stack up against each other, which one's the best, which one's the worst, which ones are worth playing, which ones are just totally worth skipping. It is worth noting, other modern Dragon Quest games have come out, but they've only released in Japan. I can't read kanji, I don't speak Japanese, so there's really no way for me to play these games realistically, and so I won't be including those. I won't be including the phone games either. There's been plenty of mobile games, the 3DS games. I won't be including the Switch ports of the original 3 games. They're not very good ports anyway. The games I just mentioned like 20 seconds ago are the games that I'm looking at today, and if you want to see me look at any more Dragon Quest, you let me know down below. I love Dragon Quest, been a long time fan, and I'm hopeful that at some point I can play every single game that's gotten a Western release. And before we begin, I want to give a huge shout out to Square Enix. Major props to Square Enix. They have hooked me up with a couple of these games for the free with review codes, and I really do appreciate it. This is really nice stuff. Thank you very much. So this intro's gone on long enough. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Subscribe if you like ranking videos. Let me know if you want to see more JRPG videos. We have a Patreon and Super Thanks going on. Any support is greatly, and I truly do mean greatly appreciate it. Really helps me out. And yeah, let's just get right into it. Of all of these Dragon Quest games that I mentioned, the modern Dragon Quest games, which one do I think is the weakest? And here we have Infinity Strash Dragon Quest The Adventure of Dai, releasing in 2023. That name is a mouthful. We're just going to call it Adventure of Dai. Another quick shout out to Square for a review code for Adventure of Dai. I do appreciate it. Now, when looking at this game, especially when looking at all the Dragon Quest games, even just looking at the Dragon Quest spin-offs, this game kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. It's kind of a miracle we even got the game. It was announced many years ago and went through a really troubled development, but we do finally have the game in our hands. And how is it? It's okay. I'm pretty mixed on it, to be completely honest, and if you look online, it seems like this game is just pretty mixed all around the board, with some people saying it's horrible, some people saying it's pretty good, and I just fall kind of somewhere in the middle. There are some things I like about this game and other things I don't like. So what exactly is this game? Because it wasn't super clear what this game even was. The game is an adaptation of The Adventure of Dai, the Dragon Quest manga and anime. I have not read the manga or seen any of the anime, so this was all totally new to me, but to my understanding, it does follow the plot really closely, and it uses like all of the art from the manga for all of the cutscenes. And you know, the first thing I'm going to say about this game is I do not really care for how this game does its storytelling. You know, when I play a game based off of an anime such as the Attack on Titan game or any of the numerous Dragon Ball games, the way they do their storytelling is usually recreating the anime through in-game cutscenes, and sometimes this game does that, but a majority of the game you're looking at still images with music behind it and them talking over it. And I'll be real, this gets old. You know, the art, it looks great, I'm not denying that, but I don't think this is a great way to do storytelling in a video game. And yeah, you do go through the first half of the manga with a lot of detail and pretty decent voice acting, but I just don't think this is a very engaging way to do storytelling in a game outside of like a visual novel. But this is an action RPG, and what's even weirder is plenty of moments are recreated with in-game cutscenes where you actually see it happening in real time. It's not just pictures, and so I was just like, I wish the whole game was recreated like this. I don't really want the pictures, but besides that, I think the story is pretty good. I really enjoy the characters. I like Dai. I like the arcs that the characters actually go through, and I really did want to see what was going to happen next. I was really bummed when the game ends because you only get halfway through the story and it just ends on a straight cliffhanger, not even a good cliffhanger. But yeah, I think the story is pretty good, and it better be pretty good because it's a majority of the game. A majority of this game you are actually watching or staring at these screens. Like the first couple hours of this game, I think I played a combined total of like 10 or 15 minutes, seriously. But when you actually do get to play this game, what kind of game is it? It is an action RPG. It is not turn-based. It is in real time, and it's a hack and slash with some RPG elements. It's not exactly like a Dynasty Warriors game. It's not a direct clone or ripoff. They do try to do their own thing. A majority of the game you are Dai, but there are a couple other characters you get to play as, and they all do play relatively different from each other. And you know, it's a decent action RPG. There's some fun to be had here. There's a little bit of depth in this. There's a few systems going on. You're not just mashing square the entire time. Okay, most of the time you are just mashing square, but there are a few systems here at play, and the game does have some challenging moments. You actually do have to even grind. You know, in true Dragon Quest tradition, you will have to grind at points, and it'll see you fighting plenty of Dragon Quest enemies and bosses. The combat itself, you know, it feels okay. It's got a nice enough feel to it. It does have some satisfying moments. You can do some cool combos and some special moves. And I'd say the action excels when you have a couple different characters to switch between, just kicking asses everybody. I like how all the characters play different from each other, and yeah, I think it is decent. A couple of the bosses are not fucking around in this game. I'll just say that immediately. You will have to actually play kind of cautiously and may even resort to tactics that a true hero like Dai shouldn't have to, but all in all, I think the gameplay is decent enough. You know, there's plenty of main missions you'll go through as you go through the story where you'll just have to defeat enemies or defeat a boss. Most of the time it's a boss, but there are some other side missions you can do, which I really do recommend doing because you'll need to grind. There's even like this endless roguelike dungeon crawler where you defeat enemies and you can eventually upgrade your characters and abilities, so that is cool. And you know, the gameplay as a whole, it's alright. The story's good. The presentation, it certainly could be better, but I wouldn't say this game is bad. I wouldn't really say it's good either. The gameplay, it has some issues. You know, it's not a great hack and slash. The balancing can kind of be all over the place. If you don't like grinding, you're not going to like this. And if you came here looking for a straight action RPG, you're not going to find it because the majority of the game you're watching these screens. All of this leads to just kind of a mixed experience. Like, the game's a good 20 or so hours long, and while I did enjoy parts of it, I didn't enjoy plenty of it where I was just like, okay, I've been watching these screens for like an hour and a half. I am getting kind of bored here. And combine that with the game's crummy ending, I can see why most people are pretty mixed on it. Do I recommend it? If you love Dragon Quest, then get it at a sale. It's not worth full price. Everyone else, you could skip it. There's plenty of better action RPGs with better storytelling and stories in general. But hearing this game called the worst Dragon Quest game ever, I'm not so sure about that one. And here we have Dragon Quest Builders, releasing initially in 2016. Now, I very much remember when the game came out, people were out here calling it Dragon Quest meets Minecraft. And you know, all these years later, yeah, it still kind of is Dragon Quest meets Minecraft. But Builders really is more than just that. The game has a really interesting premise and setup. It takes place in the world of Dragon Quest 1, but it goes off the alternate ending where the main antagonist was not defeated and the main hero actually joins them. But then it's a trap. The main antagonist kills the hero, destroys half the land, and it's up to your builder characters to rebuild everything. And that leads us to the gameplay, which is, I know this is going to be really profound. Building. You'll do a lot of building in this game. You know, it's very much like Minecraft with the blocks, but you'll be doing a bunch of building, whether you're building camps, buildings, structures, etc. And you know, just to compare to Minecraft, because I'm feeling quite reductive today, like Minecraft, there's some survival elements. Stronger monsters come out at night. You got to eat food over time to survive. Those survival elements are there, and I think they're decently well implemented, but a majority of the game, yeah, it's building. But you can't just build whatever the hell you want with nothing. You're going to need materials. And so you'll head out, you'll go get materials, whether it's dungeons, whether it's exploring around, or defeating enemies. Yeah, there is some combat here. It's as basic as Minecraft's, where you really just run up and hit them. There's not much to it. Weapons can and will break, so that's another thing to keep in mind. And then you'll get plenty of quests to build stuff for people or obtain an item. And you know, a majority of the game really is doing quests, building stuff, getting something for someone, and fighting plenty of monsters along the way. When it comes to the presentation, you know, it definitely looks like a mix of Dragon Quest and Minecraft. It still very much looks like a Dragon Quest game, but it is blocky and it does have a cute aesthetic to it. I think it looks nice, it runs nice, and I really don't have any issues with it. The aesthetic kind of even reminds me of Dark Cloud. In fact, a lot of this game actually reminds me of Dark Cloud on PS2, if you remember that. Now, a big question I always had with this game before I tried it was like, what does this game do that's different from Minecraft or even Dark Cloud? And in the end, it's Dragon Quest. You get quests, there's leveling up, there's a little bit of RPG elements. You do a lot more building than you would do in Minecraft, where you actually have to build structures and things for people, and that's kind of cool. There is a little bit more depth here, but it doesn't feel all that different still from Minecraft or Dark Cloud. It still very much feels like those games with a Dragon Quest sheen, Dragon Quest paint over it. It's a very chill sandbox building game. It's a really relaxing game where you just build stuff. There's usually very low stakes involved with like everything you do. The game is stupid long. You could play this game for 50, 60 hours easy. And if you enjoy building things like you played with Legos a bunch as a kid, I think you're gonna love this. Me personally, yeah, I played a few hours of it and I was starting to get a little bored of it. I was like, all you do is build, it's in the name, that's the point of the game. Maybe I'm not the right target audience. I don't think I'm the right target audience for this game, but I still think it's good. It seems like a great building/architecture game. In fact, both builders do. Maybe it's just a case of me not getting it. Regardless, I can absolutely see why so many people got into this game. It's a shame I wasn't able to, but I can still appreciate what the game has. And here we have Dragon Quest Builders 2, which released in 2019. Now, like I said, I wasn't huge on the first Builders, but I was like, you know what? Let me give the second one a chance. Maybe it'll be different. Maybe I'll enjoy it more. Well, turns out I like setting myself up for failure. That's probably why I want to do YouTube full time, but I wasn't really huge on Builders 2 either. I can see it's a clear improvement over the first game, and I did enjoy my time with it more, and I like some of the additions they have here, but in the end, it really is still just a building game, and I think it was silly of me to expect really anything else. At least when it comes to the story, it's also interesting like the first game, taking place in the world of Dragon Quest 2, and it takes place after the events of that, and it sees your main character doing building. I know, this is really surprising. Water's wet, the sky's blue, unless you're me and you're colorblind, but yes, you'll do a lot of building. The story, you know what, I like how there's more of it here, and I like the characters, and I kind of like where it goes, at least for the part that I played. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, it's very similar to Builders 1. You can actually go first person, which is cool, and there is some more depth that has been added here. One of the big selling points of this game is the fact that there is cooperative gameplay. The original was just single player, which I always thought was a bit weird. It just kind of weird, there's no co-op or multiplayer, but here you can play together, you can build together, you can have a world together, you can join other players' games, but you can't alter their world when you do that. I was a little disappointed by the co-op that you can't play through the story mode together. At least it didn't seem that way. You could only, build to your heart's content and explore the sandbox like you were doing Minecraft multiplayer, but I really did want to play through the story mode with my friends, so that was disappointing. Other than that though, it is cool you can have other people play with you. Now, when it comes to the core gameplay, it's very similar. Like I said, majority of the game is building. You're gathering materials, you're doing quests for people, you're building structures, buildings, bases, getting food. There is some survival elements, you'll fight some enemies. The combat has been expanded on. This is better. It's more of like a hack and slash combat with two moves. There's like a standard attack and a spinning slice. I know it doesn't sound like much, but it's better than the first games. The combat, it was fine for what it was. I think the survival elements in the building are good. That's something that I should mention for both builders. The building is very good. It's very intuitive, easy to use, easy to understand, and you can get to grips with it very quickly. The building gets a plus, and it's actually very friendly, especially to people who don't really play builder games, i.e. me. Outside of Minecraft, you don't find me playing any builder games. Like, to continue to give props, the UI and menus are really well done. They're easy to read and understand, and that is good. At least you know what you're looking at. Now, when it comes to new features from the first game, they have added a few different things. They added fast traveling, which was not in the original game. You can actually do some underwater exploring, which is cool. Going underwater is always different. You can glide now, which is a great way to do some traversal, and the game just has a bit more speed to it. I don't know, it felt faster than the first game. Graphically, it's pretty much the same as the first game. It doesn't look all that far off from Minecraft, but it has a nice Dragon Quest aesthetic spray painted over it. I like how the game looks. I can appreciate it. I like the music. I like all the familiarity and typical Dragon Quest noises, sounds, and music you'd get from any Dragon Quest game. It's here, and I enjoyed it. Like the first builders, the game is also stupid long. You could play this game seemingly forever. There's just a ton of content here, and I did not finish it like the first builders. I did enjoy this game more, and if I was going to get sucked into a building game, I would definitely choose this one, and I have no problem recommending it if you like building, if you like Dragon Quest, if you like Minecraft. I think you're going to enjoy the game, but be warned, it's in the name, but what you're doing here a majority of the time is building, and so keep that in mind. Still, it's a very good game, and I think if I say build one more time, I'm going to rip my eye sockets out, so I'm going to stop. And here we have Dragon Quest Treasures releasing in 2022. Now, there were a lot of really great games in 2022, but barely anybody talked about Dragon Quest Treasures, and that's a shame because I actually think this was a pretty solid game. And I even did a full review of the game, which you can check out. But to summarize, this game is a prequel to Dragon Quest XI and is about Eric and Mia, who are just little, and I really do mean little kids here, with a big imagination just wanting to get some treasure. They live on like a pirate ship but then get transported to another world, and it's about them finding treasure. The plot is really basic. There's some other characters here, but yeah, very simplistic, easy to understand, and easy to get into. I like the story for what it was. It's nothing complex or anywhere near as good as any of the main game stories, but I think it's fine for what it is. When it comes to the gameplay, it is all real-time. There's no turn-based here, and it actually has a bit in common with the Dragon Quest Monster series. You're dropped into these environments, which there are a couple of, and you're looking for treasure. You can play as Eric or Mia, but there's really no difference between them and a bunch of monsters. To get the monsters to join you, you just defeat them, and sometimes they want to join you. It's as simple as that. But looking for the treasure, you got like this big compass basically that spins around and tells you where the treasure is, and you go look for it. And then you dig it up. There's common treasure, really rare treasure, quest items that you dig up. You really do be all about that treasure. There's even dungeons full of treasure, but there's also plenty of enemies. There is combat in this game. The combat, it's not the most complex. You have some basic attacks as Eric or Mia, and a lot of it really relies on you summoning the monsters to help you. Speaking of, you can summon monsters in this game. There's a bunch of different ones that you can summon, and they all do different things. It's actually really cool, and one of my favorite aspects of the game is how all the monsters do something different. There's a good variety here. Some of them are like the bat, where you can glide around, so you can basically fly. Some of them are like the tiger, where you can run around super fast, and some of them are like King Slime, where you bounce on them and jump super high. Traversal really is one of the main gameplay points to this game, is you do a lot of traversal. You'll have to do plenty of platforming and exploration to get the treasure, and these monsters will help you. They all attack in battles. While some are clearly better than others, but they all will help you in the fights, which is good because Eric and Mia can't really do all that much damage, at least not without their trusty slingshot. You actually do get a bunch of different ammunition types, so that is cool. The gameplay I think is actually really solid. I enjoy looking for the treasure. The combat is fine when it shows up. The worlds are decently designed, and I think the traversal is fun. I actually had fun with this game, but I will be the first to admit that the treasure hunting, it is a little too simplistic. There's really not a lot to it. You just kind of let the compass tell you where to go and dig it up, and by the end of the game, it was starting to get old. Especially in the sound department, like I just started muting my Switch because a lot of the noises and sound effects just get repeated so many times, like when you're finding treasure, that it just got really annoying. And speaking of presentation and sound, that's probably like my biggest issue with this game, is the presentation just isn't very good. Look, Square Enix clearly didn't bring their A game. They didn't put all the money behind this one. It's very clearly low budget, but even for being low budget, it just doesn't look that good. The character models are all stiff and the facial animations aren't great, and then the environments are just really flat and dull. There's just not a lot of detail here. At least the monsters look decent, but for the most part, yeah, it doesn't look all that good, and the frame rate wasn't great either. Maybe on PC it's a little better. But yeah, the presentation, it's not so hot. But I still think this game is pretty good. I enjoyed the gameplay, the treasure hunting, the fun little story, and how cute it was. It's got a good length to it, around 15 hours or so, and it ends before it gets old. The pacing and flow I actually thought were very good. You're constantly going to new areas, getting new monsters, etc., and they kept things exciting. If you like Dragon Quest, I think you're going to enjoy the game. Just don't come in here expecting the next fully fledged Dragon Quest game, though, like some people did for some reason. That's clearly not what this game is. It's just a little spin-off that stars Eric and his sister, and you know, I enjoyed it for what it was. Is it better than Builders? It might not be, but I had more fun with this than Builders. And here we have Dragon Quest Heroes, The World Trees Woe, and The Blight Below. That is just way too long of a title. I'm just calling this Dragon Quest Heroes 1, and it came out in 2015. Now, I actually got this game when it came out. You know, I was like, oh, I like Dragon Quest. This is developed by Omega Force. This is going to be kind of like a Dragon Quest Dynasty Warriors-esque game, and that's exactly what it was. It did not disappoint. You know, over the years, I have played plenty of Warriors games. Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors, Warriors Orochi, Dynasty Warriors Gundam, Hyrule Warriors, Fire Emblem Warriors, the Berserk game, all of those. One day, maybe I'll rank those if somebody wants to see it, but Dragon Quest Heroes, I think, is actually one of the better Warriors games, especially for the time. I really think this game and its sequel actually take advantage of the Dragon Quest IP and are more than just, oh, it's a Dynasty Warriors game with this licensed coat of paint on it. Now, when it comes to the story, this game has the unthinkable. It has the monsters and the people actually living peacefully for once. But then all of that changes because of course it does, and it's about our two heroes trying to recover the heart of the monsters to stop the world from being plunged into chaos and darkness, yada yada yada. You know how this goes. The story, I think, is fine for what it is. It's a pretty typical Dragon Quest story, but what really makes this story are the characters. The two main characters are fine enough, but what this game really sells itself on is how many fan favorite characters from the Dragon Quest series show up. a bunch of great characters show up here. In fact, let's just talk about the character roster immediately. This game has 13 different characters to choose from, and some of the all-time greatest Dragon Quest characters are playable in this game. My boy Yengus from Dragon Quest VIII is here. He is here, he kicks some ass, and he's awesome. And kicking ass is what you do in this game. Dragon Quest Heroes really mixes the hack and slash Dynasty Warriors combat with a bunch of characters, monsters, RPG elements, and lore from the Dragon Quest games. Now, I know upon first glance, this game might just look like any other Dynasty Warriors game where you're just fighting hordes and hordes of combat, just slashing away at everything, but there's actually more going on under the hood here. Yes, the hack and slash combat is very similar to Dynasty Warriors, but there are different combos you can do here, and it feels like there's a little more nuance than some of the other Dynasty Warriors games, and something I'll immediately give a ton of praise to is all the characters feel vastly different from each other. They all have different attacks, different special moves, they're all very different, so that is good. And I actually think the hack and slash combat is pretty good. You know, it's not the most in-depth compared to something like Devil May Cry. It still is at heart an Omega Force hack and slash, but it's satisfying, it's fun, it's engaging. It does get a little challenging, and I love how some of these characters feel. Like my boy Yengus, he feels like a freaking tank. You just annihilate shit with him. He is a ton of fun in this game, seriously. But the hack and slash combat, it's satisfying, it's fun, it's engaging. There are some RPG elements thrown in there, like experience, like leveling up, and I think this is decently well implemented. It didn't seem grindy. There's also skill points, attributes, equipment, and that's all pretty self-explanatory, but you gotta remember that's not usually in Dynasty Warriors games, so it's nice here. But something else it throws in that I like is that you get to summon monsters. Sometimes when you defeat them, they'll drop a coin and then you can summon them to come help you. I think that's cool, and it gets really helpful, especially towards the end of the game where it actually does get decently challenging. I think the game has a solid pace to it. I never thought it got mind-numbing or boring. I was engaged pretty much the entire time. It has a mission structure to it, and yeah, the flow is nice. Now when it comes to the presentation, I think it's one of the better looking Dragon Quest games even nowadays. I think it looks good, the characters are expressive, the environments look nice. It's a good looking game. It looks better than Treasures, and it came out like 7 years before. Yeah, the game looks good and the frame rate never died on me at all, and I love the voice acting in this game. Some of these characters have never had a voice before, so hearing them talk, it's great. The accents are great. I love this game's aesthetic. And the vibe this game has, it actually really reminds me of the first 2 or 3 Dragon Quest games where it's pretty lighthearted with a few serious moments. I like the vibe. In conclusion, Dragon Quest Heroes, it's a pretty solid hack and slash. There's some decent RPG implementation. It takes advantage of the Dragon Quest IP. It has some of our favorite characters, a good story, good presentation. It's one of the best Warriors games out there for sure. And if you like Warriors games, if you like Dragon Quest games, or shit, if you like both, this game is a no-brainer. And here we have Dragon Quest Heroes 2, which came out in 2017. This game is the follow-up to the first Dragon Quest Heroes, and yeah, it's a pretty solid follow-up. It's bigger, better, and it's got more going for it. When it comes to the story, it is a little different from the previous game. It sees 7 realms all at peace with each other, and well, something shows up that threatens that peace. You know, we don't want to go to war, all these people and monsters don't want to die, something shows up, and I'm gonna just leave it at that. The story is actually pretty decent here. You know, it is a bit of the typical Dragon Quest affair, but I enjoyed the story for what it was, and then of course, a bunch of the fan favorite characters show up here. Like, a good amount of fan favorite Dragon Quest characters show up here. And I enjoyed the story for what it was. I enjoy seeing the characters here. I enjoy what happens and how it progresses. The story, I thought it was good. When it comes to the gameplay, it is very similar to the first Dragon Quest Heroes, but there are a few improvements. First off, the game's structure and pacing is much more like a traditional Dragon Quest game rather than just a series of missions you go through like the first one. There's actually a world map here. You can actually explore these big open areas, and you know, these are definitely better than whatever Dynasty Warriors 9 was doing. There's even random monster encounters that'll show up here. I actually kind of like the big open areas. I think it's a decent change of pace. Of course, there are plenty of battles you'll go through that are very linear and how you would expect from a Dynasty Warriors-esque hack and slash, and these are good too, but it's a good mix-up and it keeps things fresh and interesting. Speaking of not so fresh, but interesting, we have the combat. You know, it's very, and I mean very similar to the first Heroes. It feels pretty much the same, which felt good. It's just if you expected this game to feel much better, yeah, it pretty much feels the same. There's a bunch of different characters you can play as, and when it comes to the roster, there's a nice mix of OC and OG. You know, there's a couple new characters here to the Dragon Quest series that I enjoy, but then there's plenty of classic characters you can play as, and they all play very differently. And I think that the hack and slash combat is pretty solid. I'd say it's slightly better than the first Heroes, but I really don't have any issues with it. It feels nice, it's satisfying, and there's a bunch of different combos. There's even boss fights here to mix things up. However, I'm just going to immediately say these are some of the worst boss fights I've ever had in a Warriors game. Like, these are just terrible, and certainly the low point of the entire game. Something that is new to the combat that I actually really enjoy is how monsters are dealt with. You know, in the first game you would find coins and you could summon monsters, But here you can actually play as some of those summonable monsters. You can actually be the giant monster that starts wrecking stuff. You want to be the giant golem and just smash everything? Yes, you can actually do that. I really enjoy playing as the monsters. This also keeps the combat fresh if you think it's getting a bit repetitive or samey. And you know, it totally can get that because this game, it is quite a bit longer than the first Heroes. The first Heroes I finished in under 15 hours. This game is double that. Seriously, it is way bigger than the first game. There's a bunch more side content. There's a bunch of extra content. There's even like this full cooperative mode you can do up to 4 players online that I didn't even try, but hopefully one day I can. There's actually a lot of content here. You get to upgrade your characters, some basic RPG elements are there, but all in all, this is actually a really solid experience. Presentation wise, the game looks a little better than the first Heroes, but I never had any issues when it came to running this game. The frame rate was totally fine, and I think it looks nice. I like the art style. I'd actually say this is one of the best looking Dragon Quest games, just period. It actually looks even pretty good nowadays. It really goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. If you like Heroes, if you like Dynasty Warriors or hack and slash games and you enjoy Dragon Quest, this is a must play. This is better than the first Heroes. There's more content, it's more Dragon Quest, and it's just a really good time. I knew I was gonna like the game, but after playing it, I was like, oh, this is really one of the best Warriors, Musos, whatever you want to call it, that you could play. This is a great game that I have no problem recommending. Even if you're not huge on Dragon Quest, but you like action adventure games or hack and slashes, I think even you'll enjoy something here. So here we have Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince. I'll give another shout out to Square Enix. I really appreciate the review code. Thank you very much. Now, this game, I didn't see anything about it really pre-release, and I haven't seen much of it after it came out either. Like, no reviews came out, no marketing, at least not a lot of marketing. I haven't seen like anything about this game, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the US this game is a total flop, and that's a real shame because I'm gonna just come out here and say that this is one of the best Dragon Quest games in years. Like, I had no expectations for this game just because of how little they showed of it. I was like, oh, it's probably not going to be very good. They're not even showing it. But this game, it actually really surprised me. I know I probably say that a lot, but it really surprised me because this is actually a pretty great game. This is as close to a mainline Dragon Quest game as it gets. While it doesn't have a number in it, it is very intertwined, it is very entangled in Dragon Quest IV with not only its narrative, but world and structure as well. You play as the Dark Prince, you know, he can't hurt any monsters because of a curse set on him, and so he is a monster wrangler. He has monsters fight for him, and that's all I'm going to say about the story because it's actually pretty cool. It's really unique, especially for a Dragon Quest game, and where this game goes, it's pretty awesome, especially if you're familiar with Dragon Quest IV. In fact, if you're familiar with DQ4, I think you're really going to enjoy what this game has to offer in terms of the story. I think it's pretty cool. Now, when I started this game, the first thing I noticed is probably what everyone else notices immediately: the graphics, the presentation. And so I'll just get right into it. This is easily my biggest issue with the game, is the graphics, the presentation. It isn't that great. At times the game can look pretty decent, and I even do enjoy the art style, but it looks barely above a PS2 game. Animations are stiff, lip syncing is a joke, and some of the environments are really flat. On top of this, the frame rate is a bit choppy, especially when you first come into an area. And a game that looks like this shouldn't really be having any frame rate issues. Does it get as bad as, say, Pokemon does? No, it does not get on the level that some of the Pokemon games get to, but if you're expecting a graphical powerhouse here, you clearly aren't getting it. However, all I gotta say is if you can look past this issue, which really isn't that big of an issue at the end of the day, as the game still looks okay and the frame rate issues aren't a deal breaker, this is an excellent RPG that I did not realize I would have as much fun with as I did. The game very much plays like a Dragon Quest Monsters game where you'll be exploring an open area and you'll get into fights with monsters and you can actually, you know, catch them like Pokemon. Okay, you don't catch them, you convince them to join the cause. And Dragon Quest Monsters actually predates Pokemon. It was the OG monster capturing game, but basically you'll have a team of monsters that'll do your bidding for you. You can't control exactly what they're going to do, but you can heavily influence the monsters during battle, and when it comes to the battles, it very much is a turn-based JRPG with some depth, but it's relatively easy to understand. And having monsters instead of traditional party members doesn't really mean much for the gameplay. It's still your party members, and these are still good battles you'll go through. I think the battle mechanics are pretty solid. I think the battles are decently paced, and I enjoyed myself during these battles. When you're not in battle, you're exploring around, finding treasure, mini medals, getting into fights, and then the seasons change as well. They actually change in real time, which does look kind of cool, and during different seasons, different monsters show up, environments change, areas that were previously inaccessible are now accessible. It changes when a certain amount of time in real life has passed, and I think it's a pretty unique mechanic. I haven't really seen it done in a game like this beforehand, and I think that it creates some interesting encounters. I actually really like exploring the world of this game. Again, it is Dragon Quest IV's world, and it's cool to see it fully realized in 3D. But I think the core gameplay loop is actually pretty good here, where you get new monsters pretty much every area. You're leveling up all your monsters, they're getting stronger, they're getting new moves, you're getting into some tough battles, you're exploring around, and getting a unique twist of a Dragon Quest story along the way. While graphically this game is not a powerhouse, I think the gameplay should not be ignored for fans of the genre. You know, this game, I think it's going to be one of the most underrated games of 2023 in general, and I really don't think it should be missed, especially by people who like Dragon Quest. I know people that really do like Dragon Quest, and they were skipping this one just because there wasn't anything on it, and it's not a mainline game. While it doesn't have a number behind it, this is basically mainline Dragon Quest gameplay. This is legit as close as it gets, and I think it's a pretty good RPG. I think the pacing is nice. I think the way the game keeps things interesting with all these monsters, like there's a ton of monsters. There's like legit hundreds of these creatures all over the place. They all look good. There's some original ones there. The game's got a decent length to it. You can take a long ass time with this game, or you can finish it up pretty quick. I actually really enjoyed going through this game. I enjoyed my time with it, and I was pleasantly surprised with just how good this game is. I enjoyed it basically over almost any other Dragon Quest spinoff. Legit any Dragon Quest spinoff, not just the newer one. Like, this game is seriously in contention to be the best Dragon Quest spinoff of them all, let alone the best Dragon Quest monsters. And some of the old monster games on DS are really beloved. This game, it's actually just pretty good, and it gets a big thumbs up from me. Zero problem recommending it. The last thing I want to mention real quick is if you're going to play this game, do not play it in handheld mode. It's crazy blurry, and stay away from the DLC. It's stupid. Otherwise, yeah, great game. And it should come as absolutely no surprise that I think the best of the modern Dragon Quest games is Dragon Quest XI. I know it's probably pretty obvious. The only mainline game of this entire list is the best game, but Dragon Quest XI is not only the best modern Dragon Quest game, but it's one of the best Dragon Quest games, period. Really, it's just one of the best RPGs you could ever play. Like, I'm gonna just be 100 here for a second. If you like RPGs at all and you have not tried Dragon Quest XI, I really do not know what you're waiting for. Like, I played this game back when it came out and went, holy shit, this game is fucking awesome. And then they've re-released it since then and added even more. Like, this really is one of the best RPGs I have ever played. In fact, I think it's great for people who don't even like RPGs or don't really play them. Like, I think this is a great game to get into RPGs unless you really hate turn-based combat for some reason. Then I think you could get into this game. The story, you know, initially, it's not the most complex. You're the chosen one, the luminary, the one that's gonna save us all. And so you go to the king and you want to know how to save everyone, and he's like, no you ain't, lock his ass up. And so then you actually get arrested, and it's up to you to figure out how to stop the evil on your own. I love the story of Dragon Quest XI. It is great. While the story itself might be a little contrived or generic, or might seem similar to other Dragon Quest games, that low-key is the point, since it's always supposed to feel a little familiar. But what really makes this game is the characters. The characters are so good in this game. I love the party members in Dragon Quest XI. It's some of the best the series has ever seen. There's so many. All the characters are actually great. Legit. All of the characters are great in this game. They all have something to add. They all have a bunch of depth and backstory and arcs. I really enjoy the characters. The story's great. The world's great. The world building's really solid. This game has a great vibe. It has a solid atmosphere. Like, I love to just vibe in the world of Dragon Quest XI. It's so good, and graphically, it's great also. This is probably the best looking Dragon Quest game. I think it looks pretty good. The environments are nice. The character models are solid. I like how this game looks. I really love the aesthetic. And then when it comes to the gameplay, it is that classic tried and true Dragon Quest gameplay you know and love. It's a turn-based RPG. You'll run around in an overworld. There are no random encounters here. You can see every enemy. You interact with the enemy. You get into a fight with it. And the battle mechanics are pretty great. It's very similar to what's in the other Dragon Quest games. You know, you take your turn. There's magic. There's regular attacks. You have some special abilities. Each character has different moves from the last. They all do play differently and have their own strengths and weaknesses. You can switch them out during battle, and then each of them can randomly pep up where they will do more damage. And this is also in Dragon Quest Monsters Dark Prince as well, which is very cool. And I like this mechanic. While it is random, it does show up sometimes when you really need it, so that is good. And other times, you know, it doesn't show up, so it's not a total crutch, but I think this is a decent addition. But the battle mechanics are very good. If you like RPGs, if you like turn-based games, I think you're going to like this immediately. Sure, it's not the most complex. There's not a ton going on with these battles. There's not a bazillion in-depth mechanics during every battle. No, it's pretty straightforward. and I wouldn't say this game is all that challenging. It gets a little challenging by the end of it, but if you use a certain character or two that are clearly better than everyone else, then yeah, it might not be the most challenging, but I really did enjoy the battles. It's traditional, it's classic, but it's also proven. It's proven to be this good for this long for a reason, because it still slaps, it's still fun. And I had fun. You can even speed up the battle, so if you think they're taking too long, yeah, you can speed them up, so that shouldn't be an issue. When you aren't in battle, you're exploring the overworld. There are some side quests to do for characters. There's plenty, and I really do mean plenty of enemies to fight. New gear and treasure to find. The mini medals are here as always, and you can actually get some pretty sweet rewards for finding them. The game has this forge, which is like a crafting system. I really enjoy the forge as well. At first I was a bit weirded out by it, I was like, is this even all that good? But the more you mess around with it, you realize it is actually pretty good. And you can actually get some really great stuff. Some really powerful equipment comes from the forge. Something else worth mentioning is if you are playing the re-release of this game that came out a few years later, you can actually play the entire game in 2D, which is just crazy. They recreated the whole game in 2D, and then there's a bunch of cool throwback areas to older Dragon Quest games. In fact, speaking of the pacing and the content, this game is huge. It's not the biggest Dragon Quest game. Nothing's ever going to be bigger than 7, but this game is absolutely massive. You can put well over 100, 120 hours into this game and still be seeing new stuff. There's a ton of post-game, end-game content here. Like, the game is just stuffed to the brim with things to do, enemies to fight, places to go. Like, there's just a ton going on here. And another thing that's great about this game is the pacing. This game is not super grindy. You're not going to have to grind enemies for an hour or two at a time like certain other Dragon Quest games. It's pretty straightforward. As long as you fight nearly every enemy you come across, you will be just fine, which is much better than other Dragon Quest games where legit you do have to grind. I never thought this game dragged on or was tedious or repetitive or got stale or old. None of that. I really was thoroughly enjoying myself the entire time I played this game. I played like 60, 70 hours of this game. I had most of it sped up, and it's a really long game, but it is a fulfilling, rewarding experience that I don't think should be missed by anybody that claims to like Dragon Quest or RPGs. Like, if you like either of those, check this game out immediately. It's so good. I would say it's one of my favorite RPGs of all time, with Final Fantasy VII, Baldur's Gate 3, Fallout New Vegas. It's up there. It's one of my favorite RPGs, and I think you'll like it too. If you've even been on the fence about Dragon Quest, this is the game to play. It's just so good. If I could only recommend one game today to you, it would be Dragon Quest XI. There's plenty of good games here. In fact, Dragon Quest, even at its lowest, I would say is still pretty good. But Dragon Quest XI just hits different thanks to its awesome story, its great tried and true gameplay, a solid presentation, and it's just an enjoyable experience. Like, I just absolutely fell in love with this world and these characters and the story and the battle mechanics after playing this game. Even for a little bit, this was all I played for weeks. And I've been tempted a few times now to go back just because I enjoyed my time that much with it. And then there's all the new 2D stuff that was thrown in there and all the separate worlds. Look, I could be here all day talking about Dragon Quest, but I'm going to finish up the video here and just say, check out Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest deserves more attention than it gets, and yeah, that's how I'm going to end it. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you made it to this part of the video, comment cement as in what's in the ground. See you all later. Bye-bye.